Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Apostate of Mind. I'm Mark Peralta.
And I'm Apostate Anne. We all know the story about Santa Claus, right? The jolly old man with the long white beard who goes down the chimney and brings presents to the good behaving children who believe in him. But there's more to the Santa story than what we've been taught in America, and there's a part that's been cut out. The only remnant left of this backstory is the black coal that's in the stocking of misbehaving children. Today, we're going to be talking about the origin story of Santa, the dark counterpart of Santa that dishes out the punishment to naughty children, and talk about how the story evolved to what we know today. Mark, tell them how we kind of got on this topic to begin with.
Yeah, so I may have heard of Krampus before, but never really clicked until I saw this video that our friend Aaron Ra posted, footage of an event that was hosted in Garland, Texas. Krampus not. And there were all these Christmas characters, but they all looked very like demonic and all these horns and witches. And it just looked like a very gothic kind of Christmas, but like there was more to it. And I'm like, what is all that about? So that just sent us on a rabbit trail of researching. And so here we are doing an episode on Krampus.
Yeah, we were so shocked to hear that this used to be part of the whole St. Nicholas Santa story, and we knew nothing about it. So today we're going to be talking about where that came from. We know the Santa of today. So take us back into where this dark counterpart entered into the scene and leading us to how this dark character got removed.
When understanding the influences of Santa, the Santa we know today, there are at least two aspects that we need to examine closely. Number one, there is this Saint Nicholas character. There's a historical character behind that Santa guy. And then we also need to understand a little bit about Central and Eastern European folklore. Santa Claus evolved from Sinterklaas, which is a name in the Germanic language that translates to Saint Nicholas. And this guy was a 4th century Greek bishop living in modern day Turkey who came from a family that was very wealthy. And apparently he was known for being very generous, especially to kids. And over time, his legends evolved and they began to spread along with the gospel itself. And so there's like traditions of Christian plays and other musical things that would take place towards the end of the year where they would feature this Sinterklaas guy and a plethora of other things that were part of sort of a Christian message.
Yeah. So Saint Nicholas was a historical person. So how did the Eastern folklore play into it?
Yeah, like what does that have to do with it, right? So what happens is, Christianity hasn't been around for too long. By the time Christianity works its way through Europe, starts encountering these local legends and these local traditions that the Christian church finds problematic. And so what begins to happen is where you have scenarios where Germanic tribes would celebrate and do certain traditions at the end of the year, like December. Well, it so coincides that Christians celebrate Christmas at the end of the year as well. So what do? They're not competing with these festivals, they start replacing them. So as peoples get conquered through, Christianity, get retold and repackaged and sort of revisited with a Christian twist. So as it turns out, you've got local traditions that involve the coming of a special creature at the end of the year that does certain things, and it finds its way connecting with the Santa Claus story.
I see.
Yeah. So what I like to do is show you what are some of these examples. Who are some of these characters that were believed in? What do they look like, and then later how they are connected with Santa Claus.
Yeah, great.
Before Christianity walks into the Central European regions, there were many local legends and myths about different characters. Stories like the boogeyman, creatures, monsters that are rooted in Nordic and Celtic mythology. Interestingly, there's this one called Frau Holly. That's where I like to begin. That is mentioned in the story of Gold Mary and Pitch Mary as compiled by the Grimm brothers. In this context, that of a Germanic Cinderella tale, which I know you have more to say about that because you read that and it's really interesting. These fairy tales are rooted in mythology. In Germanic folklore, one of those characters was called the Hulda or the Halda. These were names of a goddess creature to whom children who died during the infancy would go to. She was also known as the Dark Grandmother, the White Lady, the Old Mother Frost. It may be of significance that the 12 days of Christmas were originally the 12, which was the same time period in the Celtic calendar where an intercalary period during which the dead were thought to roam abroad. And Frau Holly,
Oh.
this one in particular, there's one tradition that puts her at the bottom of a well, and also that she rides a wagon. And for some reason, many of these are associated with weaving, spinning thread from fibers like flax. So I think part of like maybe the local interest here is like people got to get busy during the winter time as well.
And that's interesting that you say that she rides a wagon, because I learned about early stories of Santa, him riding a wagon over the chimneys. So, that's a interesting connection.
Yeah. And so part of that was that she would visit people's homes in order to inspect and make sure that stuff was in order and that threading, enough, thread was being spinned and whatnot. Like all these things had to be done in order for you to make her happy. Otherwise, you could literally die. So
Mhm.
now, depending on the region in Europe, it takes on different variations. Not only that, but these myths also work their way into fairy tales where the stories take on more interesting nuance. So recently you read something from the Brothers Grimm that I thought was fascinating. Could you kind of retell us more what that's about?
Yeah, I looked into this story, the Frau Hall, and the story goes there's a widow with two daughters, one who is her biological daughter who's ugly and lazy, as the story goes, and then the other is a stepdaughter who's beautiful and very helpful around the house. So she has the beautiful daughter doing all the chores in the house, kind of like a Cinderella story. And she's spinning the thread to the point to where she's bleeding and she gets blood on the spindle of wool or thread. So she goes to the well to go rinse it out. And here's where the well comes in. So she rinses it out and drops her spindle in the well, and she tells her mom, and her mom tells her, well, you better go fish it out. And so she jumps in the well and ends up at the bottom of the well where there's all these flowers and a field, and she comes to an oven with bread inside, and the bread's saying, let me out, I'll burn. And so she takes out the loaves and puts them out. And then she walks by the trees, and the trees say, shake us, that we're apples and we're really ripe. We're ready to eat. Shake the tree. And so she shakes the tree and the ripe apples fall. And then Frau Hull comes out and she tells her, I'm going to have you work for me. You're such a good worker. And if you work well, then I'll reward you. And so she becomes her assistant. And so as she's doing this very consistently, Frau Hall wants to reward her. And so she brings her back home and she covers her with this gold. And she's said to shine bright. And so she comes back home and the stepmother sees that, now she's been covered in gold. So she's like, oh, my other daughter can go work for you. So the other daughter starts trying to gain the attention of Frau Hall and starts working really hard, but she kind of cheats. Like she pricks her finger and puts the blood on the wool to make it seem like she worked so hard to where she's bleeding. And then she takes the bloody wool and puts it in the well, like, here I am, here I am. And so then she jumps inside. Same thing happens. The oven is there at the bottom and with the breads inside saying, let me out or I'll burn. And so she's like, no, I don't want to get dirty. And then she goes by the trees and the apples are like, shake me. I'm ready to eat. We're ripe. And she's like, no, I don't want an apple to fall on my head. And then Frau
Mhm.
Hall comes out and so she knows the deal. She wants to get the gold. So she like starts cleaning and starts helping. And so after a few days though, she's, sleeping in and not really being very helpful.
He's being naughty.
Yes.
Mm.
And so she kicks her out. And instead of the gold, she pours pitch on her. And
Ooh.
this pitch never washes away.
Mm.
And so there's some ties there where bringing either blessing or bringing punishment. And then also, depending on how hardworking they are or
Mhm.
lazy they are, how well behaved or not well behaved.
Yeah, certainly. And that's so fascinating. It makes me think of this sort of divine being that's keeping count of your goodies and all your baddies. And then if you end up in the positive at the end of the year, you get rewarded. If not, you're in big trouble. What's interesting about these characters, these mythological legends, these characters, is that they both take on a positive and a negative aspect to them. Like they're both the rewarder and the punisher.
Mm-hmm. Bringer
Um,
of blessing and bringer of wrath.
Yes, yeah, they have those powers. Depending what region of the world, they take on different qualities to them.
Hmm.
Yeah, so one of those in the northern Germany tradition is Frau Godin, where she's said to be cursed because she expressed to prefer to hunt for eternity rather than to go to heaven.
How dare she want to
Yeah,
hunt?
that's right. And her daughters, who expressed the same desire, were transformed into small dogs who pull her wagon or sled, or serve as hunting dogs.
Oh,
Yeah, and
so they're
actually,
the
I've had
precursor to reindeer pulling a sled, maybe. Oh, uh-huh.
you see on
So
the
these
left.
were her children.
Yeah, potentially. And there's the kind of the sled. And she is a warrior kind of goddess that's associated with the hunt. Some have associated her with Odin's wife, also kind of a goddess of the hunt. So she visits the homes of humans during the 12 nights of Christmas or during that time frame. And she punishes the lazy while sometimes rewarding the virtuous or those who help her. So, Frau Godin, there's another one
Mm.
called Spillahole. She is a cruel version of Frau Holly because she actually kills children. So this one gets a little more rated R. The
Oh.
Spindlehole is a sick looking old woman with short arms and legs. She looks like the stereotypical witch or hag. She oftentimes is depicted hooded, wearing rags. When spinsters are not finished with their spinning, then the Satsmusi will sit in their lap during spinning or even give them spindles that can get easily caught on fire. The
Oh.
spindle takes the lazy spinners away. Now, these are I'd imagine what's in mind here are kids that are having to work hard, right? Making thread. So there you have a story where if you don't meet your quota, you're going to get punished. And so she would come with like a batch of stinging needles, these herbs that would cause prickling irritations on your skin. Very interesting. Another one is Frau Perkta. Frau Perkta was known as Bertha or Bertha or spinning room lady. She's often depicted with a beaked nose made out of iron, dressed in rags, perhaps carrying a cane or a
Hmm.
beating rod, and
Oh,
generally resembles a decrepit old crone and carries a long knife hidden under her skirt.
that's
Hmm.
scary.
What might she do with that? Legend has it that you'd better get all your flax spun by the 12th night, which coincides with January 6th. For most Christians, this is known as the Theophany or the Day of Kings, where the Magi show up. For when
Hmm.
Christian season was over, it would be time to set up the big upright loom. That's where they start weaving everything, I suppose. At which time you must have enough thread to warp it in and start your weaving. And what's Frau Perkta's punishment for those lazy ladies who hadn't finished all their weaving? In Germany, Austria, and in Switzerland, there were numerous tales of Frau Perkta trampling and even setting fire to those half spun fibers.
Oh man, that's mean. I wonder if, during the winter time, people have fires going on in their homes more and, they're more likely to have things catch on fire, have fire started. And I wonder if that'd be something like, oh, that must have been Frau Perkta punishing them. They must not have had a tidy home or finished their weaving in time.
Yeah, but Perkta did a lot more than just checking on your spinning skills. She also wanted to make sure that the house was neat when she got there and that you left her a bowl of porridge.
Oh, I wonder if that's where the whole like leaving a cookie out for Santa came from.
Yep, it could be.
Hmm.
Yep. Also, she would walk around with like other people. So you can see on the left, those are actually little children. And so
Ooh.
part of the mythology was that children that died in infancy, especially if they were not baptized, they would go to her. And so they would follow her everywhere she went.
I had a friend that was commenting about how she was driving around looking at decorations and she noticed that people were now combining Christmas and Halloween and incorporating a lot of gothic things. So I wonder if some of those people were not incorporating some of these older traditions.
Another interesting companion of the Perkta, in addition to the children, are these wild beasts that are later known as Krampus or Krampi. I'm not quite sure how to say the plural, but they're horned animals that are like, and then this is all like reenacted by actual human beings putting on costumes and everything. But they're thinking of some wild beast that's part of the punishment. And that Krampus character gets then adopted into the St. Nicholas tradition. But that
Mm,
doesn't happen until a little later, because all of this that we've talked about, it's all pre-Christianity. Okay,
okay.
these local legends, these stories. Now, as Christianity moved into those regions of Europe, it promoted along traditions of St. Nicholas as well, in addition to the gospel. You know, these things were syncretized with local myth and the folklore. It also prohibited other things because, you know, the church, they took issue with things like the Krampuses, for example, because they look very demon like. So at first, they try to prohibit these traditions. And when I say traditions, I'm talking about like the festivals and the processions that would take place during the month of December, where these creatures would go around town knocking on people's doors and actually reenacting some of these confrontations like, did you learn your prayers? Did you take care of your chores? Were you an obedient child? That kind of thing. And if you were a good child, they would give you like little pieces of candy or like dried fruit or something. You would get some kind of reward. But as these stories merged with Christianity, some things were lost, some things were preserved. And one of those local folkloric traditions that
Uh-huh.
couldn't shake off was the Krampus. And so the Krampus became not abolished by the Christian church, but it got sort of
Mm,
grafted into the St. Nicholas message. So the message about this benevolent guy going around town
mhm.
giving gifts and all that stuff adopts a purely pagan mythological creature into its own story
Oh,
because it
mhm.
can't get rid of it, so might as well use it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the Santa part bringing blessing was the good part of the perkta and the whole when the times that they were giving blessing and reward was the Santa character, and then the punishment side became the Krampus character. And Krampus does look like the stereotypical demonic. He's a half goat, half man creature, hooves for the legs, hands for the front, has these horns, a tail, a long, sharp tongue, and then a switch that he beats the children with, or sometimes also characterized as having chains. So he's very much what the stereotypical today Christian would consider as a demonic looking creature.
Yeah, certainly that version of that character does assimilate most Christian, devils, so to speak. But this wasn't the only expression. There are others that I do want to talk about that I think are really interesting. The first one being this character called Connect Ruprecht. And I don't know if I made this clear, but these characters are understood as like Santa's companion. And so
Oh.
as Santa is making his rounds, so
Mhm.
he's gonna have naturally some helpers. And so who that helper is, especially the one that's got to deliver the punishment, that punisher will vary depending on the region as well. So, for example, in the folklore of Germany, there's this companion of Santa known as Knecht Ruprecht, which translates as farmhand Rupert or servant Rupert. Tradition holds that he was a man with a long beard, wearing fur or covered in pea straw. He sometimes carried a long staff and a bag of ashes and wore little
Mm.
bells on his clothes.
Oh, jingle
And
bells.
jingle bells, yeah. He would also ask children whether or not they knew their prayers, and if they do, they receive apples and nuts and gingerbread. And if they don't, he beats them up. So he's got something, some kind of rod or branches made out of like hard wood that he could beat the kids with.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. In other versions of the story, Connect Ruprecht gives naughty children gifts as lumps of coal, sticks, and stones, while
Mm-hmm.
behaving children receive sweets from St. Nicholas. And so that's sort of like the big, and which is, if you ask me, it's an improvement, because I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but one of the things that Frau Perkta would do if you were misbehaving, she would like open you up and like remove your guts and fill them up with straw and stones and stitch you
Oh,
back
so
up.
there's where the straw and stones and all that come from. Instead of being stuffed in you, now it's stuffed in your stocking or your shoes.
Exactly. Yeah. So not as bloody.
Ah,
Hmm. Another character is the Belsnickel, and this is another German tradition that was actually depicted very accurately by the character, what's his name, Dwight Schrute in The Office.
yeah, I remember this episode.
Yeah, and there you can see he's got a whip and
The
the
switch or
branches,
the
the
branch.
switch. Yep. And so he was another companion of St. Nicholas, covered in fur, of course. Sometimes he wore a mask with the long tongue, and he was rather a scary creature who would visit children at Christmas and deliver socks or shoes full of candy. But if they were naughty, they would get coal again in the stocking instead.
Seems like such a very similar rendition, just a different areas adaptation of it.
Yep. In the what's known as the lowlands or like the Holland region, another
Netherlands.
yeah, their version of the companion is this character named Swart Piet or Black Pete. The character first appeared in his current form in an 1850 book by Jan Schenkman and is commonly depicted as a black Moor or dark skinned character prominent from Morocco or Northern Africa that was Santa's companion and slave.
Oh man, so that would not fly today to have that representation as one of the characters. And that makes so much
Definitely
sense
not.
because I was always like, wait, how is Santa wearing this white plush suit? He's a big guy going down the chimney. How is he not getting so dirty? So he's sending down Black Pete.
Black Pete, like Connect Ruprecht, he was also, the one doing the punishing of the naughty children by beating them with rods and whatnot, carrying the sack of gifts for the good children and a sack of coals for the bad children.
Oh, he's
This
doing
is
the dirty work, the
actually
heavy
something
lifting.
that, yeah, and it's actually, so like a lot of these traditions are still being celebrated today. And so if you go to Holland during this time of the year, you might run into a procession where you'll see Black Beats and St. Nicholas is all over town. And it's quite controversial because it's not like apparently there's not a lot of black people that volunteer to do this. It's like white people that paint their faces black.
Oh yeah, that would not fly here.
Yeah. So that's the way they do it. So we've talked about Bell's Nickel, Black Pete, Connect Ruprecht. The fourth and final variation of this Santa assistant or Santa servant or companion is the Krampus. My favorite, of course. So, according to researchers, Krampus likely found its origins within the pre Christian Alpine regions and folklore of that part of Europe. As I mentioned before, he was very likely part of the entourage of Frau Holland. So he was already a known mountain beast of the wintertime that would also come around and check on you to make sure you were being nice and being obedient. And this one gets adopted by Santa Claus as well. And it's depicted here. You can see on the left picture, there's Santa there.
Mm-hmm.
And, Krampus, he's beating some kid up. And notice, I don't know if that's the mom on his right side. She's crying.
Oh
It's
my.
just a horrible scene. Many of these are postcards from like early 19th century.
The original Christmas card.
Yeah.
So maybe instead of sending out family photos, now we should start sending these pictures of Krampus
Yep.
beating a child.
Now, some of these get a little more kind of cartoonish, but essentially it's the same. You've got a scary monster that is there to keep you motivated so that you can behave. People maintaining the perk tradition became inspired from a seasonal Christian play titled Nicholas Play that involved St. Nicholas, but it also had other things in it, like the biblical Adam and Eve dealing with a tempter and morality, among other things. In the plays, St. Nicholas rewarded children for their scholarly efforts rather than being good and well behaved at first. As in many areas where pagan traditions melded with Christianity, the Nicholas play influenced people to start a sort of a proto Krampus run where many dressed in costumes and held processions called Perkentoff, which also introduced St. Nicholas's good set of morals. So here's where the stories begin to blend in. You've got the St. Nicholas character that comes in talking about good morality and so forth, merging in with like cautionary tales and warnings of beasts that may hurt you if you don't do what you're expected to do. You see?
And I would even say later on, it evolved to being about believing. So it even got away from being well behaved to good grades to just believing in Santa being enough for you to get presents.
Yeah, so we're gonna make it easier and easier for kids. Now there's not a spending quota, but you just gotta believe in Santa.
That's it.
Yeah. So to just sort of this, and I think the best thing to do it, and I've never done it. If you're interested in this, I would encourage you to do it. But if you travel to parts of Europe where they do celebrate Krampus, not, I think this is in Austria
Mhm.
specifically, you will see how they do a parade where they go through like the main street of town and people dress up and they put on these masks and they scare children and they're doing all kinds of different stuff. You've got all the Krampai characters in the background. There are many of them.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, and then at the very front you see Santa. There's another big Krampus right next to Santa, to his left. And then to his right, you'll see like the Connect Pract, the guy wearing the hat, and that becomes this whole wintertime play that it's part of their culture still. And
Is this from the Nicholas play?
this is from the Nicholas play. That's correct.
Ah.
Yeah. So what happened to all that? How come we don't do Nicholas play in America?
Or Krampus. Why isn't Krampus part of the story
Yeah.
of the Santa Claus story we have
Yeah.
today?
Yeah. And, we can only theorize at this point. I think that it's church and culture will try to go where it's more convenient to go. Like
Mm-hmm.
some of these things are a lot harder to explain nowadays, like children getting beat up. So,
It's
so
the
we
path
can't
of
talk about
least
that.
resistance to adopt into the culture.
Yeah. One of the things that Krampus would do, if you were naughty, he could actually snatch you and take you to hell.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That
So,
would bring a lot of fear to a lot of children.
yeah, I think that it's possible that during those times it became convenient as etymologies or explaining away how things happen. So if people go missing during the wintertime or homes get caught on fire, like you mentioned earlier, because they've got thread everywhere and they've got the fireplace, stuff like that happens.
Mhm.
And rather than just saying, oh, this is just a freak accident, people will invent some story behind it and say, yeah, it could have been because of this or it could have been because of that.
And
And
I think
so,
about too, like kids in the wintertime typically would maybe outside other times of the year, but it's wintertime. So now they're inside. And so now they're having to be well behaved and, putting them to work
mhm.
and, keeping them motivated to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, how we get a little crazy, like cabin fever.
Uh
So
huh.
imagine like during the winter time where you just can't go out. It's so cold outside. You're stuck at home and everybody's there. First of all, you got to do something. You got to stay busy. Second of all, don't complain or try to go outside because you may get snatched up by Krampus.
Hmm. So we've seen this story evolve and a lot partly due to church activism. We've seen them kind of demonize the Frau Hole story where she had the spindle and that was kind of seen as a broom and kind of tied to witches and she was known for being part of the underworld and children that had passed. So then it became popular part of the story that she was dealing with demons. So she really became demonized and cut out of the story. Also, we talked about how Krampus fit the definition of demons. And so the church really fought to stop and prohibit Krampus night celebrations, dressing up and running down the streets dressed as Krampus character. All of that was abolished by the church because they were really trying to, as a symbol of their spiritual battle with the dark side.
And not to mention that they want to emphasize the birth of Jesus and other Christian Bible themes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we see the activism continuing to play today. We see the church activism of having Jesus be the reason for the season and keep Christ in Christmas and really trying to maintain this Christian tradition across the board and kind of taking over the other traditions. And then you also have activism of the people to stop some of these traditions. So, for example, in the Netherlands with Black Pete, they see that this is problematic because this is highlighting the racial history and almost perpetuating the continued positioning of the Black person carrying the bags and going down the chimney and that whole racial stereotype. So every year when they put on this parade, with the Saint Nicholas and Black Pete, you have a bunch of protesters coming out, speaking out against this character.
You could argue as well that other parts of the story get overly emphasized, like the Santa Claus aspect gets emphasized with, you know, we've seen like Coca-Cola advertising that, you know, they super populated those images of like the rosy cheeks, old white beard, fat, red robed Santa that most people are familiar with. And so if media and companies are stressing certain parts of the story, then culture changes and it adapts. And so you have the phenomena of marketing as well. Music, I think, plays a major role as well. We have
Mm.
things like I think, I mean, if this is a trend, you know, where stories and characters morph and evolve over time, I think that in the future we could have you know, a variation of Santa that's more of a blend of Mariah Carey and Santa. You know, she's known as the Queen of Christmas.
No, God.
Yeah, and for good reasons. So you know, it's things
Wait,
get more and more exciting.
so what would this look like?
Yeah, so you see now, the queen of Christmas takes a step forward, and she is now the center of the story.
So maybe Santa runs away with Mariah Carey, and then they take over the North Pole and rule. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, she gets grafted in, and then also let's not forget about the elf on the shelf as
Elf
well.
on the
That's a
Shelf.
modern,
The Grinch is sort of that bad character,
yeah,
but he
yeah.
turns good.
It could be that you'll wake up and you find a mess that the elf caused, and it's because you
Mm.
didn't do your chores or something happened.
Yeah, he's known as being very mischievous.
Yeah.
So we've seen exactly how stories can evolve through time and adapt to different societies. And so we hope that these stories bring you cheer, bring you information, and now you understand what's behind that lump of coal in the stocking
Take care, guys. This has been awesome. I'm Mark Peralta, and this has been Apostate of
of
Mind.
mind.
They call me a god.